I'd like to welcome our first solo speaker, our keynote speaker of the afternoon to the stage, talking about overcoming challenges for multilingual games. It's Semih Altinay from TransPerfect.
All right, hi everybody. So Semih Altinay, been with TransPerfect for about a decade, been in the industry a little bit over than that. And I specialize in software globalization. So today we're going to talk about games that are in different languages. Today there were some cool presentations about how games help companies be global, and the world is a smaller place now. It's a much closer knit community overall. So we're going to talk about how language affects that and how we should be mindful of certain pitfalls, but also talk about how to make that process a little bit better. So first, a little bit about TransPerfect. We've been around for 30 years. We just actually celebrated our 30th year anniversary last week with 1,200 of our employees in Amsterdam. It was a lot of fun. But we started in 1992. Back in those days, you just had a few big corporations like Microsoft and Oracle and Sun Microsystems, which is now the same company, doing localization and translating their software products into different languages just because they were so global. But now, today, even startups are translating content. So we support them in all aspects of it. Anything that language touches, we do, which means translation of text, but also subtitling audio. It could be creating content specific to certain locales, certain cultures. So that's what TransPerfect does. We also have the supporting technology as well. We're all over the globe. Every little white dot that you see, it's over 100 different cities around the globe. And the stuff that you see in blue is specifically for gaming solutions. But we ourselves are a very global company, so we're very, very diverse, and that really gives us a unique, I think, perspective in all types of different multilingual content. So today we're going to talk about how to make this a better process, and we kind of came up with a magic weapon for you, if you will. There are 3 major steps in creating a multilingual game. This really starts in the development, so it's not an after fact, but really when you're creating a new game, when you're designing something from scratch, that's when really you should be starting to think about what you do and how you prepare the game to be multilingual. By the way, there are a lot of abbreviations here. I don't know why, but our industry abbreviates everything. These are alphanumeric abbreviations. It's the first letter, then the last letter, and the number of characters in between. So G11N, it's really G, 11 characters, and then N. Localization is L10N. Internationalization is I18N. So there are 18 characters between I and N. So you'll see that throughout the presentation, but you'll see it everywhere. So if you do a Google search, you're going to see I18N best practices. That's what really that's referring to. Now, this is a continuous process. You start with internationalization, which is really a development task. Then you go into localization. Then you test everything. And then you just kind of repeat that process over and over. But this is the magic formula. This is the best weapon that you have. Because if you start initially with that, with the global audience in mind, then you're going to have much easier process going forward. So the first step is internationalization. Let's start with that. We're going to kind of provide you with some best practices. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. When we're developers and we're creating content, we always want to think about the global audience. What that means is, first of all, you should be able to display all characters in all languages. So right now, you may just be in Western Europe, but what if you go into Asia, right? You need to be able to display different characters in Asian languages. It could also be right-to-left languages. Unicode is the best system for you to do that because it already allows you to do this. Now, I have an example in there. In English, you have capital I, which doesn't have the dot, and then you have the I that has the dot, right? In Turkish, these are 2 completely separate characters. If you've implemented Unicode properly, then you'll be able to display the capital I and the little one without the dot, and then the capital one with the dot, and then the little one. So again, these are some of the things that we've seen over the years, customers have some issues with. If you do the proper implementation, it should be fine. The next thing is separating all translatable assets from the code. What you don't want to do is hard code translatable assets or translating let's say translatable text. The reason for that is, imagine going into one language, you can just go in there and change the text, right? But what if you're going into 10, 20, 30 different languages? It's going to be a massive work, and you're going to have some issues with the code base as well. So what you want to do is have the functionality separated out completely, create proper resource files. Like for iOS, you would have something like localizable.strings, or for Android, you would have something like what is that called? Strings.xml. So make sure that you're using the proper resource files. This system already exists. All you have to do is use that instead of trying to hard code text in there. This also includes things like images. If you have a lot of images with text embedded inside, it's very difficult for your translation vendor to translate without having to recreate the image itself. So if you have to do it, at least have it layered so the text can be separated out from the image itself. It's just going to save you a lot of money over time. The next thing is definitely be mindful of the expansion. Spanish, for example, expands up to 30%, sometimes 40% from English. So we have an example here. Because of a design problem, the text, when it's expanded, it covers up the graphics, right, for the characters that you see in the back. This happens all the time. Sometimes it gets cut off, sometimes it overlaps with another image. So you definitely want to have enough space. One of the things here, to expand the text, you can't really see it, but we actually use something called pseudo-localization. As a developer, one of the best tools you can use is fake translations run through the software so that you know what it's going to look like when it's actually localized. So before you spend the time, energy, and the money to translate content, you can run either machine translation or you can run something called pseudo-localization where you can expand the text, add some identifiers to the beginning and the end. But make sure that you understand how the real estate is going to react to the expanded translations. Oops, let's see. Not sure if this is working now. Oh, here we go, okay. There we go. All right, now we'll talk about some pitfalls as well. Definitely watch out for concatenations. These are segments that are brought together to form a sentence. The problem here is different syntax rules, different grammar rules for each language. So in English, a lot of times it will make sense. Like if you say 5 images have been downloaded or 10 weapons have been acquired, that weapon is a variable, right? It could be weapon or weapons. It could be a bunch of different things, items. The number 5 could be just 0 or any other number in English. It doesn't really matter. English is very flexible. But when it comes to Romance languages, you have masculine, feminine agreements. It's not going to work the same way. If you have certain languages like Czech or a lot of the Eastern European languages, depending on the number, the ending changes completely. So it could be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. In English, you have either 1 or any other number. So be careful. Don't segment it out to a point where it's going to be very difficult for translators to come up with a way to translate the content. I know the screenshots are somewhat small, but here you have an example. It says delete studies, and then there's a number. Then there's a drop down for week, weeks, day, days, and then there's after receipt or import. The problem is these are all separate segments. So if I'm the translator and I look at this, I have no idea what the context is without seeing the UI, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. The next thing is hardline breaks. Because we have such small real estate on a mobile device, we sometimes have to like force the line break to go into the second line, right? Again, in English it works. But it doesn't work in languages like Arabic or Hebrew or Japanese where there are specific rules to break the line called Kinsoku rules. Here we have Thai. Thai language is very unique, for example. You have the entire sentence as one big word. So in English or other languages, we're used to seeing spaces, right, between words, and then you have some kind of punctuation mark. In Thai, you don't have that. The entire thing is one long word, and whenever you see space, it's the beginning of a new sentence. So if you force the hardline break in there, you're going to, corrupt the grammar. It's not going to look right. The next thing is, again, language syntax being different in different languages. You want to be able to be, you want to have a flexible UI. You want to make sure that the locale switching mechanism, when it's utilized, it can reformat the messages. Let's say in English, you may have noun, verb, and then the object. But in different languages, you may have noun, and then object, and then verb, or completely different ways. So we just want to make sure that we're mindful of that. Okay. The next thing is right to left languages. Again, Arabic, Hebrew. You can't quite tell probably in that image, but on top you're seeing a game explanation screen, instructions in English, and then on the bottom, we kind of mimicked what it should look like in Arabic. So it's still in English characters, but we kind of completely like flip the UI. You want to imagine holding a mirror to the UI, but you don't want to go overboard with it either. In this example, the text is flipped. So I'm going to get closer to be able to explain here. The text is now flowing right to left compared to the top part. But as you can see, the images are the same. Whenever there's logic involved, you do want to flip it. For example, here, you do have back button, which goes this way, and play game, which goes that way. In Arabic, we want to flip that entirely because the logic needs to flow this way. So back is now this way, and play the game is this way. So it's hard to think about it sometimes, but if you just hold a mirror to the UI, you'll be able to get it. Now, when you don't want to go overboard is this image, you don't need to flip the entire image, it's okay. The other thing too is, if you have like a table with a bunch of column headers and things like that, technically that's okay. You can still leave it the same way. It all depends on how much work is involved in doing this. Finally, you want to use existing I-89 libraries or internationalization libraries. There's a lot of stuff that exists out there. We had clients in the past that tried to implement some kind of virtual keyboard by themselves, create it from scratch. There are a lot of other things that they try to do. You don't want to do that. There are a lot of resources that exist out there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Using the existing libraries will only help you. And all programming languages have it. The operating systems are much better today, especially for mobile. So doing that only helps you guys. So that was step number 1, which is internationalization. Again, that was more geared towards development. For localization, there are other considerations that you should consider as well. First, we want to kind of talk about how localization works in the first place. So you have a developer that uses a variety of programming languages, and with those programming languages, again, we talked about separating code from translatable text, right? We want to create a proper resource file. Again, it could be localizable.xml or strings.xml file for Android, and then localizable.strings for iOS. Once you have a resource file, it then gets sent over to your vendor. They translate it, they give it back to you the same way they received it. So you should have all the tags intact, and you should have, instead of English, it's a key value pairing. Here's the key, and here's what it should say in Italian, for example. After that, it gets deployed to all types of different platforms, and that process is repeated over and over again. Now, you don't have to, of course, recreate resource files. You can just add on to them. But this is part of the reason why you don't want to use things like Excel or CSV. Sometimes it just makes it more difficult to manage, especially if you have a multilingual Excel file. It is used widely, but it's not the best practice. It can cause character corruptions for different languages, and it's just not the best practice. But if you use the native resource files, you're going to do much better. Now, what the translator sees is quite different. They don't get any of the context. So all they see is a bilingual table, essentially. So you have the English on one side, they make their translation on the other side. We do have what we call CAT tools or computer-aided translation tools. They have some things that help them, like terminology lists, what was translated beforehand, but they don't see the context. So it's really important to provide that context information for them, because context is everything. What we had to do over the years is really develop a tool that kind of ties the development into localization. So in our tools, we were able to display the context, which is the screenshot from the UI, identify all the strings that appear in that UI, and then find out each text and what it actually says. If there's a corresponding translation, then we can see that as well. But let's just say you don't have a tool like this. You should still be able to provide context to your translators by giving them, here's the text, like in the resource file, you could comment out the context information. Like the back that you see here is not the back button, it's your back, right? Let's say it's a medical game. In fact, this is so important. I'm going to have an example in a little bit about how that, the reuse of text or recycling of the text for different contexts causes issues. But it's one of the easiest ways you can ensure quality is giving your translators the context information. Some other things, create content for a global audience. The text don't have, it's difficult for games sometimes because you do have some cool lingo, right? But think about a global audience. The more difficult you make something, or the more unique you make something sound, the more difficult it's going to be to translate. So again, context is important, but also think about the sounds. Make sure that you're localizing the voice. If you have any kind of subtitles, captions, make sure you're translating those as well. And of course, the images, and making sure those images are appropriate for different cultures as well. By the way, going back to the other one, one of the things is, in here, green may be good, red might be bad. Sometimes these colors do make a difference. Like in China, it's the opposite. Red is actually good. So just understand your audience before you try to, develop and go too far down that path. The other thing is having unique string IDs, especially when you have the same text for different contexts. That back question was a good one, or a back example. This was a mobile app for Alzheimer's patients. It was kind of a game that you would play on a mobile device, and there were a lot of different body parts and stuff like that, and one of the things was back. But the developers or the localization engineers, since they saw the same word, they just started using it all over the place because it's the same word. Again, back button versus your back. And it just caused a lot of issues in all other languages because it's not the case anywhere else. Save and save, could be in different contexts. So we want to make sure that we keep that in mind. Always maintain a translation memory. It does two wonderful things for you. One, keeps terms consistent. So you don't have to keep translating things. If a translator goes on vacation for a month and then now you use somebody else, you know for a fact that previously translated content is going to be caught and then it's going to be the same way. But the other aspect of it is it saves you money because you don't have to keep translating or paying somebody to review translations that have already been accepted and kind of called golden. The next thing is over-the-air updates. Again, we had to develop tools for our clients to do this because they want it to be agile. Sometimes you want to launch a brand new language. The problem with a manual approach is, okay, so I can make an update to a particular language, a new string, maybe there's a new feature, but that has to now get submitted to the App Store, right? And it may be about 2-3 week delay depending on the test that they run. And then it's now available on the App Store for download. But until the user downloads it, it still may not be available on their mobile device. So if you have tools that allow them to kind of update the strings over the air, now you're going straight from the development all the way into the end user. So you're skipping a lot of the unnecessary steps in between. This, of course, only happens when you don't have like heavy functional updates on the app as well. This is just for the string updates. The next thing is the App Store content itself. This is how the game is explained, right? There are screenshots in there. Don't forget to localize that and make sure that it's consistent with the translations that you're using on the app itself as well. Finally, don't forget community management and player support. Earlier, again, there was a great session about globalization. And part of it is really, you have now a global audience. So you have social media, you have other aspects of it, and understanding your clients that speak different languages, but also being able to communicate with them in different languages is key to the success of a game. All right, the final piece is testing. Test everything. A lot of the times we're talking about functional testing when we're talking to developers, but at the same time, you want to test the functionality in all languages, especially when there's a manual process where you go to a vendor, they translate content for you in Excel files, you then copy and paste, and you don't really read these languages, especially for character languages like Arabic. You have no idea what it's saying. You copy paste in there, all of a sudden you just realize you switched yes and no, or download and cancel. Could be a huge thing, right? And if you don't have native testers, you're not going to know that. But this is a functional issue, not really a linguistic one. Sometimes the wrong message is displayed in the wrong language. The game is in Polish, but then all of a sudden you're seeing an error message in Czech. So obviously that's not going to be a good look for the game itself. Use only native speakers to test localization. So the linguistic quality must be tested by native speakers. Sometimes we'll have developers that look at something, say, oh yeah, everything is in Chinese, we're good. They don't speak Chinese. They just think that all these characters are fine, but actually they're not. There are issues with it. Maybe the font is too small, you can't see all the strokes, for example. So you want to use native testers. With that first one too, I just want to add, because earlier this came up, when we develop games, we always want extended gameplay, right? We want people to play the game as long as they can. In fact, we don't want somebody to beat the game within half an hour of just starting to it. So that's a key aspect of it. But then for testers, they don't have a whole lot of time. So if something takes days or weeks, you want to have some cheat codes for them or some other ways, maybe add some currency, add some money in there. You want to have the testers be able to just kind of quickly go over all the features of the game without them having to spend days and weeks to try to beat the game. So that's a key aspect that came up earlier by during a conversation. Be mindful of units, measurements, dates, time formats, currency, all that stuff must be localized. It's going to make the game, it's going to feel that this game was developed for those local audiences, not necessarily like designed for the US and then just, after the fact translated. UX is everything. Understand your audience. If there's no good customer adoption rate in a certain language, for example, understand why. Maybe talk to them, do some qualitative, quantitative analysis. It should all be part of it. I think we do this on some greater market research initiatives, but we don't really do it on a localized manner, meaning, okay, I'm all over Latin America, it's great, but then for some reason in Argentina, I'm not selling my game, or people are downloading it and they're just deleting it the next day. Why is that? Make sure that you're understanding your audience well. Finally, do not forget about accessibility. Again, this came up today earlier. It was great. But you want to be more inclusive. The reason we want to be global, yes, we want to make money, right? We want to get more international revenues. But at the same time, we want to expand. We want to have a big global community using our games. You want to have that same inclusion for folks with disabilities as well. Now, you may think, well, if somebody's blind, how are they going to play my game and all this stuff? There are definitely ways to do this. I think WCAG, or WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, gives you some great ways to do this. But just think about certain things that you may not be aware of. For example, a lot of flashing content, like those ads and things like that. That could give somebody with epilepsy seizures. So we want to be careful with this. Somebody that has bad eyesight, right? 2 small characters, it's hard to read, especially with character languages. Color contrast issues. And honestly, an accessible product is a good product for everybody anyway. So just think of it in that way. Like if I have my phone and there's a dark mode, light mode, it helps me. It doesn't have to be that I have some disability. You're outside, the sun shines through your screen. It would be great to be able to see the differences, like the high contrast mode, things like this. So again, an accessible product is a better product. That's it. I think we're kind of over time, but if there are any questions at all.